3. I'm a retired newspaper reporter. My name is Louis Griswold. I spent most of my career at the Fresno Bee. And when I got to see what this one was about, it reminded me a little bit of a feature story compared to the technical stuff that I just spent an hour listening to, not fully understanding it. Well, today I'd like to introduce Hannah Whitley, who is getting her PhD from Penn State in rural sociology. She specializes in water and agricultural issues, and what she's going to do for us today is show how to use pictures and stories to tell the story of farming in general and the story of your farm. So let's please welcome Hannah Whitley.
I love having such a smaller group, so before we get started, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. Do you prefer mic or no mic? Mic? Okay, we'll do the mic. And again, because we're smaller, it's going to be much less formal seminar presentation. So any questions you have, any thoughts you want to share, just shout them out and we'll make it more like a conversation if that's okay with you all. Okay, awesome. So thank you so much for the introduction. Like you said, my name is Hannah. I'm a PhD student at Penn State, but I always like to start with the background. Some of the stupidest people I've ever met have PhDs. So just because you're going to grad school just means that someone paid you to go to school for a long time. So it means nothing, that title. But what I'm going to share with you today are a set of experiences that I've experienced the last couple of years thinking about how do you communicate agricultural issues with groups who have never been to a rural area, have never seen a tractor, and quite frankly don't know where their food comes from. So, working in a high, tense political climate, how do you share your story with people who don't agree with what you're doing and have never even experienced what your life looks like? So with that said, I'm kind of a roadmap where we'll take us. I'll give you a little bit more in my background. Why am I actually doing this? Why am I qualified to be sharing this stuff with you? We'll look more about influences and origins of this photo voice. You'll see I've set up these boards around the room so you can look at those for examples, but we'll talk about why are we even doing this in the first place. And then we'll go into some really nitty-gritty tips and tricks if this is something that you're actually interested in implementing in your own work. Like I said, I come from the academic side of things, so though I have a background on a farm and working in agriculture, I'm not currently a producer. So the way I go about doing this type of public relations stuff is not from the context of producing myself, but all of this stuff can be applied if you're actually on the ground working in a farm or ranch setting. So, a little bit more about me. I grew up in southwestern Oregon on a 500-acre beef ranch in Douglas Fir Tree Farm. Did FFA, did 4-H. That's me and my sassy dairy cow brindle at the Douglas County Fair. Don't want to brag or anything. I'm the reigning grand champion poultry showman at the Douglas County Fair. So I have this really intense, agricultural education background. I did my undergrad degrees at Oregon State, and when I finished, I did not know what I want to do, but a professor said, "Have you considered going to grad school?" And I said, "What is that?" So they said, "They will pay you to study issues that you're passionate about." So I was interested in things related to the social side of agriculture, right? Like, how do we make life better for farmers and ranchers like the people in my family? So went to Penn State. Fast forward a couple of years, I just finished up my dissertation fieldwork in the Klamath Basin, or the Klamath Project. Is anyone familiar with that region at all? Okay, a couple of head nods. So if anyone's familiar with Klamath, high water scarcity, high water conflict, a lot of talk about there being the next major water war in the west there. So it's this area where a lot of people in agriculture feel like nobody knows what it's like to do our work here because they've never been here. So I'll tell the story of how I got started with this photo voice project in a second. But so just, that's the background that I'm coming from, very Western setting, focusing on water and agriculture issues. So what exactly is this photo voice thing that was in the topic of this talk? It looks like the formatting got messed up a little bit, but thinking again, how do we show people what it's like to live our lives without physically bringing them to us? So in this new age of social media and the internet, how do you actually communicate with people about what it's like to live your life? And so Photo Voice is really helpful for answering these questions about, can I move this? There we go, now I can see my slides. So how do we reach non-ag communities? How do we reach policymakers? How can we reach both at the same time so that it's less work and less time? How do we actually start productive conversations rather than just increasing conflict and speaking past each other when we have conversations? How do we build trust, right? Like, trust is the thing that makes progress happen. And then how do we build empathy? So empathy being, how do we help people understand the struggles and the triumphs that we have too? So we got our basic definitions down. So I'll be using the word photo story. And when I say photo story, I mean a picture and a caption together. So I've got a couple examples here. So this right here is a photo story. We have the person's picture and then the caption that they wrote to say why this picture is important or what they wanted to communicate when they took this picture. So one example here. So this was a photo that a rancher took in the Klamath Drainage District. We talked about Klamath a second ago. She said, "Dairy cattle on the banks of irrigation canals. It is important for water to be in the canals because farmers use it to water cattle and irrigate crops." So you have a couple things here, right? When you look at this picture, you just see a gorgeous photo of cows looking at the camera, right? But in her story, she's communicating that we need water in this canal for two reasons: for the cattle and to irrigate crops, right? So it's telling you the story of things that you can't necessarily see based on your interpretation of a photograph. So then when you have a conglomerate or a ton of these photo stories lumped together, it's a Photo Voice project, right? So it's a collection of pictures and stories that have been combined by multiple people. And the origins of this Photo Voice project come from academia. Interesting enough, they actually come from the world of public health. And in the 90s, there was a researcher at the University of Michigan, and she created this study with a group of women in China, and the idea was to focus on issues of reproductive health and development in impoverished rural communities in third world countries. So she recruited 62 photographers from this very impoverished rural area in China. They were all women. They were all farmers or doing some type of agricultural labor. And they came together in these facilitated small and large group discussions with the goal of thinking, how do we show the rest of the world what it's like to live where we are and live as women, as impoverished women in a third world country doing the work that we do. So they gave them cameras, you know, like the little point and shoot cameras from the 80s and 90s, and they asked them to take pictures that show what it looks like to live your day-to-day life. So you'll see on the bottom left there's this photo of a young girl washing dishes or attempting to wash dishes without any water. In the middle, there's an older woman who's carrying buckets of water on her shoulders because there's no running water in her house. And then on the right side there's another woman who's getting water from a local trough in order to carry it back to her home, right? So what they ultimately did with these pictures is you're shedding light on public health issues. You're empowering local women, saying, please show us what it's like for your experience. We need to know, because then we can then connect with public health officials, public policy people. You may not have access to them directly because of where you are and what resources you have, but we can share these images with them and help tell your story without physically bringing you there. So that's evolved, and today Photo Voice is very common. It's becoming more common in farming and ranching and agriculture, particularly in the academic research world. And what I'm advocating for is saying it doesn't just need to be done by academics. It can be something that's used by people who are outside of academic spaces to advocate for yourselves using your own words and your own images to advocate for yourself. So, oh, and it looks like the formatting messed up here, so I apologize for that. But what can you use Photovoice for? Number one, it can connect you with audiences that you don't typically engage with. So again, farmers and ranchers, we love to talk with other farmers and ranchers because that's who we're comfortable with, right? We're comfortable with discussing things with people we already know. But this gives you a medium to start a conversation with someone that you're not comfortable with already. Number two, we spoke about this already, but it allows you to use your own words, your own interpretation of images to start those conversations and to tell your story, right? It's easier to show something rather than to say it or explain it, or at least is in my experience. So that's another way that it helps you there. Number three, it helps to show why policies should change or why things should stay the same, right? When you take, and there's some stories, I can look for specifics later if anyone's interested, but you can say, like, hypothetically, if a policy was changed, the landscape would look different in this way. And that would affect me because insert reason. So therefore, we should not change a policy or keep a policy the same because it would affect me in this way. And you can actually show that image. And then finally, this method allows you to have your voice heard. So it's so difficult when you're doing agricultural work. You're so tired at the end of the day from actually producing and doing the behind the scenes operative work that nobody ever talks about of getting value and importance for. This is a simpler method rather than running a big social media PR campaign. It's something you and your family can do with the easy access of social media. So I'm going to give you two examples of different Photovoice projects that I've coordinated, and they're very different. They're in different geographic locations, as you'll see. They were with different groups of people, and you'd be like, Hannah, it makes no sense. Why did your employment path work out this way? I don't know, it just happened. So stick with me, it's gonna make sense in a second. So the first one is a project I coordinated in 2019, so before COVID, and it was called the Female Farmer Photovoice Project. And it was a project with 20 mostly black women in the city of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, who were working mostly with agricultural nonprofit organizations. And I met them because I was the graduate research assistant for a program called the Pennsylvania Women's Agricultural Network, PA-WAGN, which is based at Penn State. When I had started grad school there, that's who they'd matched me with, who was giving my funding to be a PhD student. And at the time, WAGN was coordinating a project where they wanted to connect urban and rural women in agriculture. And so they were hosting these events and these webinars where they would physically bring leaders from the urban centers of Philly and Pittsburgh to more rural areas of Pennsylvania. And during lunch at one of these meetings, this woman right here, Quiba, she said, you know, this is great and wonderful, but I feel like we're wasting our time and we're wasting our money by bringing these limited amount of people here. What is an alternative way that we can show people what it looks like to live and to do the work that we do without physically bringing them there? So I was sitting here listening to her say that, and I remembered when I was at Oregon State University, I took a class from this woman in the bottom here named Missy Cheney, and she was discussing that reproductive justice Photovoice project in China, which I'd mentioned briefly earlier. And I said that Photovoice methods that was used in China can be applied to do the thing that PA-WAGN was wanting to do and what Quiba was recommending, which was sharing your stories without physically bringing people there. So I said, I'm going to see if the government has any money to do that. And they did. So I got a graduate research grant. So I would be getting my master's thesis and doing research on this while simultaneously coordinating this photography project that would allow the women of Pittsburgh, because that's who I partnered with there, to share their stories with the rest of Pennsylvania. So we're going to pause on that, and I'm going to give you my next set of examples. So COVID hit. I moved back to Oregon because everything shut down, right? And so there were questions about, was I going to be able to continue doing research in Pennsylvania? Was I going to stay in Oregon? These type of questions. And I was reading Capital Press one day. We were talking about reporting, and there was a article about the Klamath Basin. And there was a tractor rally that was happening because farmers were protesting lack of water that was being allocated for irrigation. And I said, that sounds super interesting. I want to do a dissertation on that. So I decided I was going to move to the Klamath Project to do my dissertation research and started sitting in on irrigation meetings. And people didn't know who I was, who was this random girl from Western Oregon who's moved here. They asked me who I was, what was my background. I told them about this Photovoice project I had coordinated in Pittsburgh, and they said, we need something like that here. We need to show people what it looks like to try to do work in a place where we don't have water for agriculture. And by the end of a lunch where I had introduced myself to 5 people and told them about this project, they had told the rest of the people in the group that I had moved to the Klamath Basin to coordinate a photography project that would share their stories. And I said, okay, I will apply for more money. And if I get it, let's do it. And I got that money, and this is what you're seeing. And it culminated in the Ag in the Basin Photovoice Project, which intended to share the stories of farming and ranching families in the Klamath Project who are trying to grow food, do agriculture in a region that has very limited water allocation. So that's what you're seeing there. And I'm not going to go too in depth on the background because it started at this fall harvest tour where I had lunch, and then the rumor was spread by the end of the day I'd come there to do a photography project, which wasn't true, but it ended up being true. And I connected with all of these different organizations who helped me recruit, apply for funding, put together the thing you're seeing right now. And we'll give more background on that in a second. But that's kind of the twisted venture of how things worked out. Are there any clarifying questions I can answer real quick before we get into the nitty-gritty of Photovoice? No? Okay. Silence is not consent, but we will move forward for time. So, when you're doing a Photovoice project, particularly when you're wanting to gather the stories of multiple people and show it in an exhibit like this, there are a couple of questions that I've found that you need to answer. So number one, particularly if somebody like me who's coming from an academic or an organizational perspective, I'm not on the ground, I'm not growing right now, I need partners to help me recruit people to get something like this done. So partnerships with a nonprofit, like another women's ag network, partnerships with Extension, whoever. This helps you, number one, with recruitment, finding people to participate. I didn't list this, but it also helps validation for your funding. So if you're applying to a funder, you can say, oh, I've got these 3 other nonprofits who are going to help me out. And then finally, it helps you identify who should be at exhibits. So who should I be inviting to view this stuff? And it also helps you figure out where these exhibits should take place. And I'll give you a little bit of background information. That Ag in the Basin Photovoice Project, participants said, we want to show this in California. We want to show this at the World Ag Expo. So me being here is a direct result of them saying, this is an audience that we want to connect with. They couldn't be here, but I could be there on their behalf. So that's just one example. Number 2, partnerships can make or break the success of Photovoice. But in doing this, you have to be really, really clear about your intentions. So saying up front, the goal of this project is to tell a story or to fundraise for a specific effort, or to increase membership in an organization, right? Like I've seen things happen where lack of transparency ruins relationships. I'm seeing head nods. Like this is something that interpersonal stuff that nobody talks about. So be clear about that. You got to be transparent about who you are. If you're a researcher, a community member, what's your background? How much money do you have? Who are you being funded by? And what are the ultimate goals or objectives of your project, right? That transparency is key. And then the last one, it says it there kind of forebodingly, but like you got to be cautious of partnership intentions too, right? I was in a situation where an organization I worked with in Pennsylvania was not clear about what they wanted to get from this relationship that we were creating. And it was because of that secrecy and that kind of ambivalence about what the goal of this was, that relationship suffered. So really just very transparent engagement with your partners. And finally here, if you're not formally affiliated with a group, having somebody who's a gatekeeper, right, a person you can trust, who's familiar with the community is very beneficial. So we're going to talk about a budget breakdown in a second, but we know money runs everything, right? Like money makes the world go round. And doing something like this, a photography project, it's very expensive and it's very time consuming. So I like to just say that up front because people want to do it and I'm like, nah, it's gonna cost a pretty penny to do something like this. So you got to think about why you want to do this. And from there, you can decide who are you going to get your money from. So me coming from an academic background, I've found that framing Photovoice as a way to build empowerment in a community, which is something it does, as a way to collect research, right? Like this is a social science research thing. I can learn a lot about what people need from this process. But when you combine it with other research, so things like soil studies or studies of agricultural needs, you can get more money right that. So this is a point mostly for folks working with extension or working in like social science. If you're in the room, this is something to keep in mind. If you decide to partner with a non-government organization, consider applying for private foundation grants. I don't personally have experience with this, but I know a lot of people who have coordinated Photovoice projects who've had success from there. And my funding in particular has come from sources from programs like Northeast Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education, which is an arm of NRCS, or the Natural Resource Conservation Service. I received money from the Pennsylvania Women's Ag Network, and then also my university's College of Ag Science. And so there's a lot of funding, particularly in academic spaces, for this work. So this is getting to transition. So we're transitioning from the more background to the more fun part of this conversation, right? So what I have up next is a set of 3 different photos, and we're going to look at the photos, very similar to what we did earlier, and I'm going to ask you, when you see these pictures, what comes to mind? Like, what emotions does it evoke? And it may not evoke anything. You might say that's a picture of a sheep, and that's it. And then I'm going to show you what the person wrote underneath it, and you can tell me, does your mindset of that picture change? So we're going to start first with this one. So can anybody shout out, what do you think of this picture? Does anything come to mind?
I go to overgrazed because it looks all gray and brown in the back.
Overgrazed? Okay. And I should back up and say, I think she just edited it so it's black and white.
Oh.
But you wouldn't know that if you just saw the picture, right? So I've had some people say, it's a nice sheep. Yeah, okay. Well, how about this? So the caption says, Mama You, and it says, as we look at more reduction in animal numbers, it is hard to decide who goes and who stays. We are trying to maintain the genetics, but these herds and flocks are not going to rebuild overnight. Does that change your interpretation of the picture at all with that caption?
It's still melancholy.
Still melancholy, right? And it hits you deep, right? Like, it's more of an issue for the person taking the picture, right? And I think the choice to do black and white added to that kind of melancholy too. So, and this is taken by Leah Saltzman, who is a part of the Ag in the Basin Photovoice Project in Klamath. And this was another photo taken by her too. So if you can't see it, it's a little light there. I'm going to see if I can shut this window. But it's a teenager shearing a sheep. Maybe. No, that's not going to work. I just broke the window instead. Oops. Okay. So with the caption that says haircut, with new shearers becoming harder to find, the sheep seem grateful when one shows up, right? So we have labor issues. We have, some might say animal welfare issues, but it's the sense of more melancholy, right? Before you just had a picture of a teenager shearing a sheep. Why is that important? Well, it's speaking to issues of labor and struggle. And the last example I'll show here, taken by Chelsea Shearer, also as part as the Klamath Project. It's a dry field, right? It's a dry field with some mountains in the back. Empty grocery shelves before they became empty. This photo is of a field that has been denied water due to government regulations. Previously, this field grew potatoes that were produced for Lay's potato chips and baking potatoes found in large retail stores on the West Coast. Not being able to grow the food makes for empty shelves in the stores. And this was during the height of COVID, right? And so when this was written, it had something more speaking like inflation was increasing the cost of groceries, but we've got this field sitting here that's not growing anything. So just an example there. So then the last couple of slides here are just, again, more practical things. And for folks who are not looking to implement Photovoice right now, this isn't going to mean anything. This is mostly for folks online, folks who want these slides to be shared with you. If you think about implementing Photovoice in your own work, here's information I've compiled from my successes and my personal failures to make your life easier. So the first project I did in Pittsburgh, again, back in 2019, I started recruiting participants for it in December of 2018. I started actually handing out cameras or inviting people to participate 4 months later. So it was a 4-month recruitment process that took place. We had one information session after that 4-month period where people invited to learn more about Photovoice. What is it? How are these displays going to be used? How is your information going to be used? Come together and decide what was our end goal. They then had about a month, so three-ish weeks to take pictures, to write the captions for their pictures. I then had 1 week to turn it into this. Then they celebrated with a community gallery reception, which I'll have photos of in a community barbecue space. So this was very, very quick, this first Photovoice process. Whereas the second one was much longer, and partly it was because of the funding limits, but also because of the needs of the partners I was working with. So recruitment this time lasted 4 to 5, what do I say in here? September? About 6 months. 6 months for recruitment from when the funding was received to when cameras were distributed / people decided they wanted to participate. This time they had a whole summer to take photos. So 4 months of reminding people, don't forget you're part of this project. And if you want to be documenting the summer, this is what it looks like. And the first exhibit for this place took place at a fair. And so it was a different audience. It was a different set of needs that was identified by participants. And so the timeline looked different too. And recruitment also took place in different ways. So when I was in Pittsburgh, I recruited at a event hosted by the Pennsylvania Women's Ag Network. I had a booth set up, was engaging with people one-on-one. The Instagram's no longer active, but I had an Instagram where I was inviting people on the internet to participate. I think I got 3 or 4 people that way, so it wasn't fail. There was research interviews being done, and so at the end of an interview, I would say, if you're interested in participating, this is the flyer for that. And it was also sent out via different organization listservs, so a lot of agricultural nonprofits, support agencies, that kind of grew. And in Klamath, recruitment again took place via an Instagram that is still active, so you can see my efforts there. It was promoted on social media and organization listservs, and a really, really heavy push by a cattlewomen's organization who had big interest in this project. So again, we met for an info session where people actually did get point and shoot cameras if they were interested. A lot of them decided they wanted to use their own cell phones or their own cameras, but they did have that point and shoot option. After they had their different amount of time for picture taking, I gave them papers that had a space. Oh, I should back up and say, so all the pictures were developed that were taken on their cameras, so they decided they wanted to participate in. I printed them out and put them on these big boards here. They then got to select the top 12 pictures they wanted included part of this exhibit. The photo they wanted to be included was removed from the big board. They pasted it on this sheet of paper. They wrote what number it was, so what number ranking they wanted it on the website specifically. Then they could write the title and write the caption. And so it was a very thought-heavy process. A lot of people put a lot of thought into it, which is really awesome. And then also at this reflection meeting, right, you see people engaging with each other. They were thinking about where in the exhibit they wanted pictures to be next to each other because they thought it told like a more comprehensive story. During this reflection meeting, we had questions about where do you want to see the exhibit, who do you want to be invited. So a lot of community building went into that process. So last but not least, thinking about budgeting. So we talked about Photovoice is very expensive and it's very time consuming. So I've given a breakdown of how much it actually costs. And for organizations of different funding levels, obviously things can be left out. But ultimately, if you want to do something like a printed exhibit like this, your base cost is going to be about $1,400 for the printing of the, what's it called, boards for the easels themselves. If you're interested in doing this, I'm happy to share all of my sources where I acquired this stuff. You don't have to do the point and shoot cameras. That was another $1,000. You know, there are things that can be updated, but for this project in particular, it was $4,800, about $5,000 to coordinate this, not including my labor, which was being paid for by another source. So with that being said, the more happy stuff. So you got all this project, you've coordinated it, you've put it together. What does it look like? What do you do with it? So the first display, the one in Pittsburgh, before COVID, it was presented at either 12 or 14 different places. And this ranged from having the exhibit set up in backyard gardens and having it at more policy-focused events for the city mayor's office of Pittsburgh, the state agricultural representative. I had it at different agricultural events, and so there was a lot of different crossover. And it was being promoted on social media, so people would share the images, share the stories. I don't have a way to document that because my expertise is not in social media analysis, but I know that I saw it and I know that word got around. And the in-person exhibits looked like this. So typically I would set up for the day and people would walk through and look at the images. I would see them taking pictures of the pictures, which is interesting. The participants are so funny. So the little guy in the middle and the top left with a soccer shirt, he participated in the project, and he was so excited during the first exhibit. He wanted to show all of his friends his pictures that he'd taken and that he was in this thing. And so it was really a big community thing, like so excited to say, I'm a published photographer, kind of a thing. So these are some more pictures from the Pennsylvania project. Yeah, a lot of events hosted there. And then the most recent one, I just started exhibiting it in September. So this is not all the different places it's going to be at. But post-COVID and doing the exhibit in a different geographic location with a different group of people who have different type of agricultural struggles than the group I was working with in Pittsburgh. It was just a different experience overall. The needs of the community is different. They're focusing more on how do I engage with more policy people, right? In Pittsburgh, it was more community building, local empowerment. Klamath is much more politically driven. And so it's soon to play out what that's going to look like at the end, what type of connections are made in terms of getting this in front of policy officials and representatives. So check in with me in 6 months. We'll figure that out. But so far, this is what it looks like. Very similar to here, but the easels are much more even because I had more than 5 minutes to put them up. And yeah, it's been very successful in terms of public engagement, storytelling, sharing. The participants are very pleased and very happy. It outweighed their expectations of what it could do. And the last piece of sage advice I'll give is if you do decide to do a photo voice project, please, for the love of God, invest in easels that break down. My first time I did it, I was very, very cheap, and I said, I'm going to get these $5 easels that were shipped from Asia someplace, and I'm a very poor grad student, and we're going to make it happen. So I was wagging around these easels that were made out of like the worst type of paper wood you can imagine. They would just break. I'd have to super glue them. They wouldn't break down, so I just had them in the back of my car. Please invest in metal easels that will break down and fit into a backpack if you decide to do that. So those are all the practical tips I have for you today. I will share that there's an example exhibit here today. So all of the boards that you see here were part of the Klamath Photovoice Project. So please stand up, take a look. They're here for you to look at. And don't be afraid to touch them. You can pick them up and look at them and read the captions. But with that being said, all of my contact information is here. I'm very happy to share everything about this process and this project with you all. And I have cards up here as well if you'd like my information. But I can take questions now if I can answer any.
At what point do you define your audience and how specific do you get?
So that place, or that, the question was, at what point do you define your audience and how specific do you get? Me being the coordinator of the projects, both projects, I left it up to the participants. So that was a conversation that we had at the first meeting. In addition to discussing, where do you want to see this? What type of pictures or what theme do you want to encapsulate? It was, what's the message, right? What's the message you want to get out? And that happened in the first meeting. So it was known very early on.
Additionally, when it comes to photo selection, do you consider yourself in charge of that, or you let the picture takers do that?
No, picture takers 100% were in charge. They were limited because I didn't have money to print all of the pictures that they had taken. So I made the executive decision, everybody gets 12, 6 will be printed, but 12 can go on the website. So the only other piece of executive decisions I make is when they are set up, what order are they in, what picture goes next to each other, which some people have very strong opinions about. But yeah.
So are all these archived on the website or YouTube?
They are. So that website at the bottom, aginthebasin.org, is where this project is archived. And the Female Farmer Photo Voice Project has a website as well, where the whole process, all the pictures are documented. The participants write the captions themselves. I am simply the coordinator. I did not take any photos. I did not write anything. I put it together, and that was it.
Do you invite anybody else in to help educate on how to take good photos, how to write a good caption?
Yes. In my projects, I did not. It was a question that was asked of the participants at the beginning. What type of training are you interested in receiving? So I know people who have coordinated projects where the photography and writing process is very intense. So they'll have a 8-week workshop series, for example. And every week you go in for an hour and it's about composition and lighting, and it's very intense. The purpose of that type of project, though, is more of an educational thing. A lot of people do it with 4-H, for kids in 4-H projects, and the intent with that is agricultural education, but also like technical camera stuff, right? So because these people in my project were not interested in that type of education, I didn't pursue it. Yes.
So how many participants did you have?
Good question. Very true. And it, yes. So the question was, how many participants do you have, and how do you choose? It was scary, because you're worried. You have this money. What if nobody shows up? What if nobody participates? So the first project I did, the one in Pittsburgh, I did not put a cap on participants. So I just put it out there, and on day one, 20 people signed up, and so I said, We're cutting it at day one, because that was my capacity in terms of money to be able to do this. So the first project, it was capped at 20. 2 people ultimately left because they moved. So it was 18 overall. The second project in Klamath, I sent it out saying the cap is 20. 20 people had signed up, but for various different reasons, none having to do with me personally. It was mostly concern about how it was going to be used in the political realm. Like Klamath Basin water issues are very, very political. So people were worried that the exhibit would be used in a way that was biased towards one part of that political issue. Obviously, it's not. It's very unbiased. It's just presenting people's experience. Long story short, 4 families decided to participate in that. So families is very loose, about 9 people total in the second project. I said 20. 12 photos per person, yeah. They select 6 to be printed? Correct, yeah. So overall, each project consists of about 120 photos, 120 photo stories, yeah.
Will you be using these photos during your defense of your PhD?
Oh, good question. So I did not choose to do this as a research project for my dissertation. This was, I saw it as something I was asked to do, or the rumor was spread that I was there to do this project. And I did not use it as a form of research. Now, my master's thesis in Pittsburgh, it was included in my master's thesis research, but for the dissertation PhD, it is not.
Have you done that yet? Have you defended yet?
I am actually just scheduled my defense 2 days ago, which will be on May 12th. So keep me in your prayers. Thank you. I appreciate it. I did. So what I did was, if you want the specifics, I used Microsoft. I used PowerPoint, and I have a template for where the picture would be, where the caption would be, where the title would be. I converted the PowerPoint slides into JPEGs, and then submitted the JPEGs to Vistaprint, and Vistaprint, yes, and printed it on Vistaprint as a foam board. So, a lot of the companies have these big vinyl stuff that they're setting up. Those are super expensive, guys. This is a much more cheaper option. I would have loved to do the vinyl printing, but the foam boards, each board is, I want to say $20 or $22 per board. But it was all me manually creating the file and submitting that to Vistaprint. Exactly. And each time I did it, I would print one. They won't send you proofs because it's not that big of an order to require or to necessitate a proof. So I would print one board, have them send it to me. If it looked good, I would send the rest in. Yeah. Overall, I would say the process of physically creating the exhibit, as a 27-year-old person at the time who's pretty technologically literate, took me about 3 hours to do everything. Yeah. Did you have a question?
Yeah, so how do we make this
So there are a lot of ag influencers, right? Like on Instagram and Facebook. And if you're interested, you can email me and I could show you like specific people to look at. This Instagram, the Ag in the Basin, is the one that I run for this project. It's not as big as I want it to be because I don't have enough time to dedicate to it. But the way you do that is by hashtags and following people. You can even request that big accounts let you do an Instagram takeover. So for the day, you show like a day in your life on the farm or something, and you post, Instagram stories and say, follow me at whatever. So Instagram specifically, that's how it works. A lot of people have asked about TikTok. I am a millennial, not Gen Z, so TikTok is not my specialty. But I've seen a lot of people have success in posting reels of their pictures with a voiceover to TikTok. I went on a farm tour when I was in Klamath. A guy who owns thousands of acres of potatoes was giving a tour to high schoolers, and he paid them. He said, if you can get a TikTok to go viral, I will give you, I think it was like a pizza party or something like that. And a kid went viral on this video of a potato that was shaped like a heart, and they had a song in the background that was trending at the time. And so this kid went viral on TikTok and got a pizza party out of the deal because they were able to use that. So long story short, I'm happy to show you particular examples of farms that have had success in online spaces. There's not at the top of my head right now. And it's possible. People have done this without a social media budget. They have done this without having marketing experience or professional photography experience. It's really just being honest in your stories. And it honestly will get out there. I'm not being like any type of optimistic. I'm a very much realist in all of this. And I've seen success come from the average person. Yeah. Any more questions? No? So like I said, I'm very open. Please contact me. I'm happy to share everything with you. And please come and look at the exhibit if you're able to.
Thank you, Hannah. That was fantastic. I'm going to go look at these photos.
Thank you.